if you could start by just telling her a little bit about your viewpoint being an archaeologist, with, looking at the historical remains of people and how important that is to your study, and then she's got a whole list of questions for you.
Okay. I guess, do you want the focus on the importance of studying human remains or the importance of, like Iowa's burial law?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Anyway, Anna is here, and I'm going to step out of the picture.
Okay. Interrupt me at any time if you have questions.
Okay.
As a physical anthropologist and archaeologist, there's a lot that bones can tell us. They provide, now with DNA studies and some other studies, they can provide genetic information in terms of relationships, but they can also tell us a lot about the overall health of a particular person, a particular population. They give us information on estimating age, sex, so we can get an idea of the age spread of a population, the number of males, females. There are some studies that can actually look at certain markers, certain chemical markers in the body, and determine where someone was born. So then you can trace things like trade, moving from one geographical area to another geographical area. Trying to think of, they can give you a lot of information about diseases. Certain diseases will actually leave markers on the bones, and so you can get an idea of the types of diseases that, and overall health of a population. You can, things like broken limbs, a broken arm, broken leg, whether or not it's completely healed, or if it happened shortly or at the time of someone's death. Certain types of trauma can give you an idea of what caused the death of the individual. So that's a very, very, very brief overview of what you can learn from human remains. With Iowa and Iowa's Burial Protection Law, the importance of that was stemmed from several different situations where human remains of Native Americans were treated as if they were artifacts, as if they were things, as opposed to the remains of people, and treated very differently from Euro-American remains. And Maria was one of the first in Iowa to really push for a change in how Native American human remains were treated. And one situation was in Glenwood, highway project, where archaeologists discovered an early historic unmarked cemetery. They carefully removed the remains of the Euro-Americans, immediately made arrangements to rebury them in a nearby cemetery. But they found the grave of a Native American young woman, and those remains they boxed up and put with the artifacts and shipped back to Iowa City. And Maria's viewpoint was, that discriminatory treatment of the remains. If you're going to rebury the remains of the Euro-American individuals, then you should rebury the remains of the Native American individual. If you're going to study the remains of the Native American individual, then you should study the remains of all the American or the Euro-American remains. And that particular incident started her activism in terms of trying to change the law. And she loved to tell the story of dressing up in her ribbon shirt. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yeah.
And marching into the governor's office, demanding to give her people's bones back. But anyway, that's once again a very short overview of Iowa's burial law. And Iowa was the first state in the country to enact a law that specifically provided protection for all remains, regardless of age, regardless of ethnicity, and whether on public land or private land.
Okay. So this year's History Day theme is taking a stand. So kind of how do you think Maria Pearson and her work with the preservation of these bones and the burial sites matches this theme?
In terms of taking a stand?
Yeah.
Yeah, she saw something that she felt was discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
She felt that, it was just one more example of how Native Americans, American Indians, were treated differently. And I don't know if you've heard the story of, that night after she learned about what had gone on at that Glenwood site, that she was out walking, trying to decide what to do, should she do anything, and her grandmother's spirit came to her and told her she needed to take a stand. She needed to stand up for what was right, and she did. And was very successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, throughout her, from then until her death, she was constantly taking a stand for archaeologists to do the right thing, for developers to do the right thing, for landowners to do the right thing, for the government to do the right thing. So yes, it fits in very well.
Yep. Okay, so since obviously this has there's two sides to every story, what was your kind of point of view? Because you're an archaeologist, so at the time, what were you kind of thinking about this?
Well, given my position as director of the burials program for the Office of the State Archaeologist, and it's now called the Bioarchaeology Program, and that's what Laura Nolder is in charge of. The law was already in place.
Mm-hmm.
I attended some of the early meetings among archaeologists, American Indians, historians, physical anthropologists, the general public, and to hear everybody's viewpoint, everybody's side. And those meetings were really good because Maria and Dwayne Anderson, who was state archaeologist at the time, made sure that everybody had the opportunity to express their opinions. And the expectation was everyone would listen. And, going through that process, working with American Indians, working with Maria, working with Dwayne Anderson, I see that there's a lot of value that can be gained from studying human remains, but I also look at them as these are the remains of individuals who are not, they're of people.
Yeah.
They're not things, they're people. And they're the remains of the ancestors of modern day American Indians who feel very strongly that these remains need to be treated with respect. I differed with some individuals who felt that that no study should take place. I felt that studies should take place, but they the remains needed to be treated very respectfully. The American Indian groups that we worked with did not want any destructive testing, so we agreed to that. That if there was a compelling reason for destructive testing, like for DNA sample or something, then we would have to take that case to the American Indian groups that we worked with and our Indian Advisory Council and make the case that it really was necessary. And if they gave their permission, fine. If they didn't, fine. But I also felt very strongly that once the studies were done, the remains should go back into the earth, should be reburied. And that differed from some of the archaeologists at the time who felt nothing should be reburied. So, I guess I leaned more in the direction of the viewpoint of the American Indians than some of the diehard archaeologists who had to hold on to everything. But there were a lot of archaeologists at the time that did come to see that viewpoint and, supported the protection of remains. So I would say by the maybe even 5 years after Iowa's law was passed, most of the archaeologists in Iowa were, if they weren't totally happy with it, they at least
This is master. Something's like wrong. It's all frozen. No, it's frozen. It's frozen. Andrew, the iPad stopped working.
Okay. That's okay. No, it's still there. Let's try calling her again. Why does that say Mike Bissell?
I think it was the connection.
I haven't shut it off yet, so where were you at on your questions?
I was on it like right here, so.
Okay. Okay, we're back. I don't know what happened.
Okay. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I was wondering kind of, when was the first time you met Maria Pearson, and what were your first impressions of her?
It's very intimidating. She had a very strong personality, and she could be intimidating, but she could be friendly and very, very, very. It was more, trying to remember the very first time I met her. Probably with Dwayne Anderson, probably at an Indian Advisory Council meeting, and she was trying to feel me out and try and figure out exactly where I stood and could she trust me, and I was just trying to be honest, trying to get to know her too. So it was, a time of getting to know each other. But I would say my overall, kind of scared, kind of intimidated.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say the political impact of Maria's work was?
I think it had an international impact. I think her work and her speaking out at various meetings and with various groups around the country, and her very strong stand, and she was a very good speaker, and she could be very forceful, and made an impact, and with Native groups around the country as well with archaeologists, archaeological groups around the country, and even with, some of the political leaders. And I think she definitely had an impact on the eventual passage of NAGPRA. But she also was very active in WAC, World Archaeological Congress, and went to meetings around the world, and also, talked about her fight and her efforts for equal protection in the United States, as well as, what other countries could do, groups in other countries.
What is the social impact of her work?
I think, she started out in Iowa, fighting for equal treatment of ancient human remains and for the reburial of those remains. But she also worked on other social problems and with other groups dealing with issues in the Native American community in Iowa, as well as other places. So she certainly had an impact in a variety of different social areas. And I think her successes gave more of a voice to the American Indian community. And, now with NAGPRA, they have a powerful voice in what's being done and how remains are treated. And, the Indian Advisory Council for the Office of the State Archaeologist has had a tremendous impact, I think, over the years. And like I said, not just with protection of ancient remains, but on a number of issues and collaborative projects with our office, as with the State Historical Society, and with other organizations around the state. So.
And I know there's not really a very prominent one, but what do you think the economic impact was?
That I'm not coming up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can, okay. If you took the opposite view, that not being able to disturb an ancient burial site, or like the Hunsaker versus Hunsaker case in Ames, where the state archaeologists denied permission to disturb the mound that was on one of the lots in their housing development. From their viewpoint, they saw it as having an economic impact, a negative economic impact, because they felt they should just be able to pick up the mound, dig it up, and put it over here and put it someplace else, which would have destroyed the mound, the setting of the mound, the whole, would have had a very negative impact on the burial site. So, yeah, it's an example of someone maybe viewing it as having a negative impact.
Okay, and this is my last question. So, if you were doing this project, what would be some things that you would consider to be critical that I would include?
That if you see something
You're frozen again.
that you think
I can't hear you. You're frozen again on my screen. I don't know if you can hear me, but It froze again. We're on the last question. Yeah. It froze again. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if it's here. It's there.
any trouble I've incurred.
We were at the last one. Yeah. Some cut off, I think, but I.
Has it been good? Good. Glad.
I already have like parts planned out, but I haven't cut it.
Okay, we're going to try this one more time. I don't know what's going on. Okay, here she goes. Okay, so I didn't get most of like the answers for the last one. So like, what do you think I should definitely include in my website? Okay, I'll see if I can remember what I said. Okay, if you see something that you think is wrong, if you see something that you think is discriminatory, if you see something that really bothers you and you think should change, even if you're afraid, you need to speak out. You need to continue speaking out. You need to not give up. You need to be violent. You need to be simple. You need to be peaceful, but tenacious. And keep the pressure on. Keep asking questions. Keep try or change. And it's amazing what you can get done. And it really is a good example. Okay. So, goodbye. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Bye. Goodbye.
Okay. This is Masters. I'm done now. She said one last thing that, like, I think I'll float out on it.
Okay.